Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third webinar in the ALMA 2020 webinar series. My name is Thad Gurley, and I will be moderating today's discussion on new challenges to lab management, leading and developing remotely. We like for our webinars to be interactive, so we urge you to submit your questions at any time during the webinar. Our speaker will address the questions at the conclusion of the webinar. Please use the question box on your GoToWebinar browser to submit questions. We will try to answer as many questions as possible, but if we run out of time during the question answer session, I will forward any unanswered questions to the presenter. Additional resources for the webinar are located on the right side of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the ALMA website shortly following the webinar. I would like to especially thank our sponsors, GLTech and Labtopia, for sponsoring our third webinar. Without their sponsorship, we have been able to provide the webinars to our ALMA community free of charge. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Scott Hanton. Scott is the editorial director of LabManager Magazine. He spent 30 years as an industrial chemist, business leader, and consultant. He had roles of general manager, laboratory operations manager, and chief scientist for Intertech Allentown. Previously, he had roles of research scientist, laboratory supervisor, and section manager at Air Products and Chemicals. Through these different roles, Scott developed expertise in polymer mass spectrometry, analytical characterization, people leadership, and business management. He earned a BS in chemistry from Michigan State University and a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Scott is an active member of ACS, ASMS, and ALMA. Scott, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Thad. It's a pleasure to be here. I also want to thank the audience for spending some time with us to learn about this particular challenge of leading and developing remotely. And it's really a pleasure to be invited by ALMA to present in their virtual conference. I always like to start my talks with acknowledgments. In case I go long, it makes sure that I have time to thank the people who are important. First, I want to thank my boss, Ken Peach, in LabManager Magazine, for encouraging me to participate in ALMA and to encouraging me to give this particular webinar in the ALMA virtual conference. I want to thank ALMA for the invitation to speak, and also I've been an active member of ALMA for about 20 years and on the board for 10 years, and I'll really encourage you, if you're a lab manager out there, to take advantage of everything that ALMA has to offer. I want to thank Air Products and the Knowledge Management Group, especially Vince Grassi, for their contributions to this talk, my previous colleagues at Intertech Allentown who contributed. I'm going to show some work from the Center of Positive Organizations, and so thanks to them, and same with Frontline Leadership and Professor Julian Miraval. And with that, let's get into the basis of the talk. So this is one of my favorite quotes from Peter Drucker. Management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right things. And as a lab manager, we have responsibility on both sides. We have responsibility to make sure that the things that the lab are doing are done correctly and properly, and that as leaders in the organization, we're making sure we're doing the right things and encouraging others to do the right things. And in this talk, we're going to do a little bit of each. So when we're leading remote employees, there's bits of things that we have to make sure we're doing right, and there's also bits of things we're doing the right thing matters. In addition to being able to do the right things, we also have to be able to demonstrate that we care. I love this Teddy Roosevelt quote, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that gets a lot more difficult when we're all working remotely, or even worse, when some of us are working remotely. And so making sure that we're paying attention to how we communicate, what our actions demonstrate, and how we are demonstrating to people in the lab that we care is an important piece of this whole process.
Hello, Scott.
Yes.
Yeah, we are not able to see your screen. I'm getting questions for not able to see the screen. Are you sharing?
I can see the screens, and I've been able to advance the slides. So
yeah, I'm seeing the screens as well.
This is a Jill thing, I think, to fix.
Jill.
Yes, I'm with you now. So, Thad, are you able to see the screen now?
Yes, I see the screen. I've been seeing it the whole time. That's why I'm surprised. that I'm getting all these questions from folks.
Right, I wasn't clear on that either. Okay, folks, so just bear with us one moment as we're able to correct this. So Scott, I'm going to go ahead and hand over the keyboard and mouse to you again. One
Okay.
moment, let me just confirm. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you again and just give it 5 seconds till you get that. You'll have just keyboard and mouse control, so you'll need to accept it on your end, okay?
Okay.
So there we go. Oh, I gotta, excuse me, I'm gonna have to mute myself. I have to mute myself first, so excuse me on this. Let me go ahead. You should have access in a few seconds of the mouse.
Okay. So for those of you in the audience, this is a perfect lead into this presentation. We are here facing some technical challenges, and I'm sure those of you who are leading remotely at home or working remotely with some of your staff away, that you're facing similar technical challenges. And so I think we're all facing them. It's nothing new, nothing exciting, nothing to get all worked up about. I have great confidence that Jill is going to figure out this this technical challenge and hand me control of the screen. And as we're working with our staff and we're trying new technologies to deal with being remote leaders, we're going to face the same challenges. Yeah, I'm seeing a question that cannot see the screen. We're working on it. Jill, I can see the screen, but I don't have mouse control yet.
Sorry, I have to mute and unmute, so I ended up actually taking over the mouse. I did hear from some people that they can see the screen.
Yes, yeah.
I'm not quite sure. So it won't really be in, we're not showing off of your screen. So what you should be able to do is I'm gonna hand you over the mouse again in a few seconds after I mute myself. And then you should be able to use the mouse to do that. And then
Okay.
I guess that you'll monitor if everybody can see the screen properly.
Yeah,
okay.
So it looks like
Go
basically
ahead.
I'm reading through the questions, and it looks like you might need, so now I can see it reloaded the screen. So you might want to go back out, everybody, and come back in, because some people can see it, some people cannot. So maybe
Refresh.
go back out and then log back in. But yeah, so
right,
I'm getting half and half can see the screen, half cannot.
Well, if half can, then probably what Jill's doing is working.
I refreshed the screen and showed up for me. Yeah, so maybe everybody refresh your screen, and then that should go. That should get you the slides.
Okay, so Scott, I'm gonna mute myself, and I'm gonna hand the keyboard and mouse back to you. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
And here's somebody who said restarting the webinar helped. Solution, press F5. So there are solutions, everybody. We do apologize for this technical glitch here. Scott, give me about another minute, and let me go through some of these questions, because it's looking like we're getting back on, okay?
Okay, good. And I can see the attendees number going back up, so people are coming back in now.
Yeah, I just refreshed and it shows now. Okay, let's give it maybe 30 more seconds.
So again, we thank you for your patience. We apologize for our technical difficulties, but for those of you who are leading remotely, this is not the first time you've experienced this. I know that my whole team works remotely, and every once in a while we're challenged by the technology demons. All right, I'm going to see if I can advance the slide now. All right, so I can advance the slides. So I think we're going to start up again.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you, Scott.
Yep, so there's a lot of different responsibilities that we have as lab managers, and here's one list of things that we have to pay attention to in our leadership roles. And we could make a very long list if we wanted to, but I'm just trying to pick out some of the things that are important and some of the things that are going to be more challenging when we're working in a more remote situation. And so many of us now are leading remotely. And I love this image here of all these different people who this guy's interacting with through his computer screen. And some of them have pictures and some of them don't, and there's complicated relationships. And this is what many of us are facing now as we're leading remotely. And those lists of tips for leadership, these all get a lot harder when we're leading remotely. So, we all know that it's important to listen in a lab management role, but it's a lot easier when we can kind of walk through the labs and overhear a conversation and walk down the hallway and talk to people informally. And that's really difficult to do now when we're working remotely. I think being positive is a lot of that is body language and attitude. And so that's also hard to do remotely. We have to be much more purposeful and mindful. We're all facing a lot of changes, and that's part of what this particular talk is about. I think establishing alignment and purpose is always important, but we have to be more critical of our communication, more concise, more explicit in how we do establish that alignment and purpose when we're not all in a room together and we're not editing one whiteboard. I think it's important for us to ask questions, and some of them can be really lab-directed business questions that we'll do in the middle of team meetings, and other ones we'll have to do one-on-one or more informal situations. We're going to talk a fair amount today about accountability and how you do that when you can't lay eyes on what people are doing. We still have to make decisions, and we still have to enable vulnerability. We have to enable people to ask for help and take responsibility for their actions. And we have to make the meetings matter because people are busy. And right now we have staff who are facing all sorts of new and interesting challenges. I have staff that are working parents and their kids aren't going to school and they're trying to be teachers and workers and caring for elderly parents and doing all of that at the same time, and making sure that we're giving allowance for all of that is important. And so all of these leadership activities that we do on a daily basis become harder when we're working remotely. But there are benefits to working remote. One of them is a lower cost. I was talking last week to a friend of mine who's a VP at a big chemical company, and she said that it was just startling to her how much less they were spending in their operations budget, over the last 6 months due to the COVID crisis and people working from home. It's simple things like less electricity and fewer rolls of toilet paper and all the sort of things that people consume when they're in the office that the business isn't paying for when they're not there. So we can have lower cost. We can also provide much more flexibility for remote workers. And that's all those challenges of childcare and elder care and all the things that people always had to worry about a little bit, but have to worry about so much more today than they did before the pandemic. We are seeing data that suggests employees are actually more engaged when they're working remotely. And that a lot of that is due to flexibility, but there's a lot of other benefits. Maybe it's as simple as they don't have that 45-minute commute, or they have more control over their workday, or we as lab managers are scheduling fewer meetings because we're leading remotely. But there's more engagement. We're getting more productivity. We're seeing people working more hours, having fewer sick days, and higher quality work. So a lot of good things have come from this challenge of dealing with remote leadership. Also, remote workers can adapt to this kind of emergency. So people who were already working remotely, like some of my staff now, live too far away from the office and were working remotely before the pandemic even hit, allowed them to pivot very quickly to this new environment. And so there are real benefits to people working remotely. But there's also real challenges to working remotely. One of the most important ones is changing how we grow our personal relationships. And so we're used to all sorts of body language and accidental conversations and informal situations, even something as simple as taking somebody out to lunch, which, boy, I'm not comfortable going into a restaurant right now, and I'm not taking my staff out for lunch when we're working remotely. And so a lot of those ways we've relied on in the past to grow personal relationships are very hard to do now. We have a lot of challenges around communications. We saw just getting this webinar up and running, just making the technology work can be a challenge. But there's also real challenges around communicating expectations, and those expectations around work quantity and work quality, and that drives directly into building trust. And how do we as lab managers change from judging somebody's work output from an activity-based to an outcome-based or an achievement-based idea? And we've got to get the technology right, and we've got to collaborate in different ways. And career development takes on a whole new task when we're working remotely. And we'll get into that, the details of the career development, later in this presentation. So we have some tips and tricks for doing remote leadership and staff development. And so I'll go through some of these. They're upcoming slides, but some of the things we really have to pay attention to are how do we build positive human relationships when we're not face-to-face? How can we be more purposeful in our communication? What are some ideas around technology? And making sure accidental conversations aren't entirely accidental. And then we'll get into a bigger conversation around career development and training. So how do you build human relationships when you're working remotely? Well, the first one is turn on the video camera, right? We're all used to this by now. All of you have been in Zoom meetings or team meetings. You have the video conferencing capability. It's going to make it so much more human. And I know we have people on our staffs who say, I feel uncomfortable with the camera on. You know, I don't want you to see the mess in my house, but it's so much benefit. First of all, it brings that human element back right to the forefront because now we are seeing our colleagues and we can read a little bit of facial expression and body language. And for me, that is so important, such a big piece of communication. But I've also found it fascinating to see how people have set up their home offices, and it gives me a little insight into their lives. You know, I found out that one of my colleagues has a real eye for photography. The photographs on the wall behind her are really interesting. And I didn't know that about her before we were doing remote meetings. Also, for me, I love kids. And so as an empty nester, you know, I don't get to see kids every day. My child's grown and gone. And so, you know, having kids walk through meetings or having pets in the background, it all just gives us more insight into their lives. Also, we need to share people bonding time. You know, we go into these meetings when we were working in the labs, and as people were joining or leaving, we're having little conversations about the weekend or the health of the mother or, you know, whatever. It's really human interaction. We need to build that into our meetings and make sure that we're doing human interaction even though we're remote. And that includes following up with people. It's not as easy as just walking down the hallway to catch up with somebody. Now we have to be more purposeful and schedule another call. But also make sure that we want to include the right people and make sure people aren't feeling excluded. And this is vitally important for you who are working in a hybrid situation. You know, maybe you're in a lab where the lab techs are in the lab every day because they're running the equipment, but some of your more senior people are doing data analysis and they're working from home. Well, how do you make everyone feel included? And that's an important responsibility of the lab manager. Talked a little bit earlier about accidental communications, and we'll get to those again, but they can't just be accidents anymore. We can't rely on, you know, a walk through the hall or going out to the car at the parking lot at the same time. We're gonna have to create those interactions. And fundamentally around building human interactions, it's about caring. And we have to demonstrate that we care to the people around us. So here's a slide based on work from the Center for Positive Organizations. It's really good. If you go to the CPO website, they'll have more information on this topic. But here's some tips about building remote relationships. So you can build and sustain relationships remotely. It's certainly something you can do. It might be a new skill. Let's be curious. Let's show genuine interest into what people are doing and what they care about and how their family's working and what challenges they're facing and how we can help. Let's make sure that we're being compassionate. There are all sorts of challenges that people are dealing with right now. One of the simplest is childcare, right? So many families relied on paid daycare, then those things are just shut down or limited activity, or we're scared to send our kids into them because of the coronavirus. And so dealing with trying to work and parent and teach simultaneously, but there's all sorts of issues out there. So can we be people first and can we be compassionate? Showing gratitude is another great way to build relationships. So can we be thankful for what we have, thankful for the people that we work with, and making sure that we're demonstrating that gratitude to people, especially if they're having a hard day. And then we just need to be present. And if you're in a teleconference, a video meeting with people, do they get your attention? Are you fully present for the meeting, or are you trying to multitask through the meeting? My advice to you is the important thing for you to do is to be there, which then leads us to communication. And so we all know that effective communication is really important for lab managers, but can we do more positive communication? And can we use positive communication consciously and effectively, especially with our remote employees? This is a postcard that I received from Professor Julian Miraval, University of Arkansas. He's a professor in communication. I had the opportunity to see him speak. It was fascinating. The art of positive communication is a great topic. There's a book by the same topic if you want to learn more. But there's a few key things that he goes over. One is that warm greetings matter. And so when we're in the lab together, we will say good morning. We'll say how you doing. We'll ask questions. We'll have little brief interactions. But a lot of remote communication is now done via email. And most people are pretty cryptic and pretty short in their emails. I'm going to encourage you to add warm greetings and warm endings to your email messages. Then we need to ask questions, and you want to ask to discover. And that's that demonstrating curiosity and learning about the other person. Then we can compliment and praise. I haven't met anybody yet who doesn't like praise. And so just sprinkling a wee bit of compliments and praise could really brighten somebody's day, affect their mood, and improve morale. Then we need to disclose, and that's about being vulnerable. And so can we share little important things about ourselves that help build those relationships? And then can we encourage? Are we giving support? Are we providing help? Are we being positive? And then last, to listen so that we transcend our differences. Professor Miravel's tagline is, when you improve your communication, you improve your relationships. And it's true for our social interactions, but it's also true for our work interactions. And can we continue to improve those relationships? And not all of that conversation happens in a very mindful and purposeful way. We are used to accidental conversations. In the past, those occurred at the coffee pot or the microwave oven or in the parking lot or in the hallways, or just sort of bumping into people in the laboratories. Well, a lot of that doesn't happen with remote work now. And so how are we going to be able to create the sort of informal small conversations, right? All the conversations that we have with staff don't have to be of the highest importance dealing with the problem experiment for the difficult customer. We need to take a little bit of time during our day to reach out to people just to see how they're doing, little one-on-one conversations. And it gives everyone the opportunity to talk to you. So you have to create access to yourself. You might say, well, I have an open door policy. But if you're at home and many of the lab workers are in the labs, your door might be open, but your office is empty. So how do you recreate that open door policy when you're remote? And maybe it's about inviting people to conversations or setting up little 10-minute interactions just to make sure that you have your fingers on the pulse and people know that they have access to you. And let me make sure I can advance the slide. So another little technical glitch. I'm sure we'll get through it. I'm not sure why the slide isn't advancing the way I need it to.
I'm sorry, Scott. Yeah, I have a problem on my end. Just bear with me 1 moment. I don't know why. I don't know why it's behaving this way. So let's just see. There we go. It's back. I'm going to give you back control again.
All right. Thank you, Jill. No worries. And believe me, Jill and I did not arrange these difficulties just for the sake of demonstrating the challenges. This is just life. All right. So helpful technology, or in some cases, obstinate technology, which we're sort of seeing right now. There is all kinds of technology available to you out there. We are, I would never say we are fortunate to live through a global pandemic. Well, maybe I should say we're fortunate to live through it, but maybe not to experience it. But if these sorts of challenges had occurred to us 20 years ago, none of the software that's on the right side of the slide would have existed 20 years ago. And trying to be safe and work remotely when we were just starting to learn how to use laptops, that would have been a big challenge. But we have all kinds of technology available to us. Video conferences, telephones, text messages, IMs, email, file sharing, all sorts of stuff. My hope is that this is a, yeah, I get it sort of slide for all of you, that you are actively using all of these different kinds of tools and probably a lot more. There's one I want to point to, and that's Givitas. If you go to the ALMA webpage, you'll see the possibility to sign up for Givitas. Givitas is a question and answer software. I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of the fact that ALMA is providing you access to Givitas for free. It's a platform where you can ask questions and get answers, and You can provide answers to other people's questions, and it's all lab managers talking to one another, asking questions that are important to lab managers. But the point of this is to use the technology that's available to you. Now let's slide into career development. Career development can be challenging for us as lab managers on a good day. And well, there aren't very many good days in the middle of a pandemic. And doing career development with all the other challenges that you are facing as a lab manager it makes it even that much harder. And now the frosting on the cake, so to speak, would be trying to do career development from a distance. So in broad strokes, career development requires your staff to have different experiences that generates new knowledge and new skills, that takes advantage of their talents and creates opportunity for them in the future. Of course, that's the ideal version. It's also going to come along with people making mistakes, having to go through the learning process. They're going to have to experience some discomfort, and we as lab managers are going to have to provide them support. So let's focus in for a moment on this concept of discomfort. I love this quote from the Center of Creative Leadership. There is no growth in the comfort zone. There is no comfort in the growth zone. So as we're thinking about career development for staff, we have to be thinking about discomfort. And it's going to be a little bit discomfort for us and some discomfort for them. Now, you may have staff who just want to be comfortable. And there's no problem with that. There is nothing wrong with a staff member who says, I am happy and productive right where I am. Let's postpone talks of career development for me for a week, a month, a year, a decade. Right? I've certainly had people that I was supervising who they didn't want to have a career development conversation. They weren't interested in a promotion. They were happy where they were. And that's okay. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. It's a perfectly acceptable outcome. But for those people who do want development, they need to understand that it doesn't come for free. They have to put something into it. And one of the things they have to put into it is this idea of being uncomfortable. Another thing we need to think about around development is, what do employees really need? And how can we motivate them and engage them to go through the work of doing development? Really, how can we get their attention? I love this particular graphic from Frontline Leadership. It is the single best one picture appreciation that I've seen for employee engagement. And because it really works for engagement, I use it all the time. So as lab managers, we really have to build that positive relationship that we talked about before. We have to provide the clear expectations and directions, basically explain to them what the roadmap looks like for development. We need to use praise and recognition in order to reinforce the positive attributes, the positive behaviors, and give them a little, good job, well done, as they clear some of the hurdles on the way through development. It's our responsibility to provide effective coaching and feedback. We need to make sure that they're learning from mistakes, that they are understanding what the development plan looks like and why it is what it is, and to make sure that we're doing course correction along the way. And that means we have to pay attention. Also, it is just absolutely vital that we're using employees' strengths. One, it's going to engage them more, and two, it's going to make the development process easier because they're building on something that they want to build on. One of the key mistakes many lab managers make is they try to develop people into their weaknesses, or try to develop weaknesses in order to create opportunity. It simply doesn't work. We need to focus on strengths. And then it's keep going, rinse and repeat, ongoing training and development so that we continue that development cycle working. There's a bunch of different things that we as lab managers have to do in order to be successful in developing our staff. I'm going to focus on this list, and each one of these now will come up in the following slides, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in some detail. You could make a different list, and I'm open to your list, but these are the ones that I wanted to prioritize. Let's start with trust. One piece of advice I have for you as a lab manager is, people often ask me, well, how do you build trust? And I think we start by trusting people. We've gone through a selection process, right? We have hired these people, we have perhaps promoted these people, we've trained them. They've given us reason to trust them. So let's trust first. And then what can we do to continue to build trust, especially when we're doing it remotely? And so how do you build trust when you can't see what's going on? I think one of the most important things to do for all of us is to avoid micromanaging people. There is nothing that demotivates me faster than being micromanaged. Tell me what you need accomplished and let me figure out how to do it. Don't look over my shoulder and criticize my every action. Also, I think we need to enable people to do their jobs. What do they need? Now, if they're trying to work remotely, do they need new and different things? I think we have to make sure that we are expecting improvement, that we're not accepting or settling for a mediocre outcome, which isn't good enough. And if we can really manage to outcomes, not to activities, then we can show people that we trust them because we're not meddling in how they're doing their job. We're simply telling them what our expectations are and then giving them feedback on what the output is. And that's a great way to build trust and use trust to help develop staff. After that, we need to think about the psychology of success. In the book David and Goliath, Malcolm Gladwell talks a lot about the value of the psychology of success and what it looks like. One of the stories he tells, he talks about two identical high school students, basically same SATs, same GPAs, same course curriculum, who go off to college to be engineers. And one of them goes to an Ivy League school, and one of them goes to a public big university. The one at the big university has greater perceived success, that she is top of her class, she's getting the eye of the professors, she's really being successful by all the measures of success. The other one has found the competition a lot more difficult. And she's being told by her professors that maybe she should study something else and not be, that maybe she doesn't have it to be an engineer. And so the moral of the story is that the environment and the psychology of progress matters a lot to people. And so if we can create an environment that demonstrates the psychology of success, so that it's supporting, that it enables learning, that it protects people and has a support system to deal with mistakes and enables people to learn from their mistakes rather than being punished for their mistakes, that we can really help people feel successful. And the more successful they feel, the faster and better they're going to navigate this development course that you've lined out for them. We also know that challenge is important for people's development. Here's a shout out to John Sadowski. John is the executive director of ALMA and somebody that I was fortunate enough to work for in a previous job. I first learned about this concept from John probably at an ALMA conference years ago, where he talked about the benefits of challenge. And if you take the story he told, you take two essentially identical new hires into the organization, and one of them you give a hard project to. You really challenge them. And what we found is that people will rise to that challenge and they will get praise. And having succeeded at that challenge, we trust them to do the next challenge. And that creates more opportunity, and that more opportunity breeds success. On the other hand, if we take somebody even who's pretty smart and pretty talented and even pretty dedicated, and we just don't give them decent work, and it's too easy and it's not interesting, and it's not engaging, and it doesn't occupy them, doesn't take advantage of their skills, then they lose interest and they stop paying attention. And by stopping to pay attention, they start to get criticized. And then we don't trust them to do the important stuff, so we give them tedious stuff, and it just falls off. And ultimately, either they leave on their own or we tell them to go away. So as we're thinking about development for people, we want to make sure that there is sufficient challenge. Another thing we want to think about is making sure that we have sufficient opportunity for everybody in the organization. And that's really about generating a growth mindset. And can we make sure that we are using change and uncertainty to create opportunity and focus on people's strengths and allow people to grow and take on development plans and take on opportunity, even if they're too young, too inexperienced, too busy, or in our cases right now, they're remote and out of sight. So let's not restrict people's opportunity to develop just because they may be younger than average or new to the organization. It's very much about giving opportunity to those who can handle it. And if we're going to learn, in order to learn, you have to be able to make mistakes. If you're not allowed to make mistakes, you're not allowed to learn. And so we need to, as lab managers, we need to provide the support system and the environment that's going to support people from making those mistakes and providing coverage so that there's not bad things that happens to the lab with stakeholders, clients, or customers because a mistake has happened. But we need to build an environment where we're going to learn from mistakes, that we're going to be candid with one another, and we're going to be open and honest about what's expected and what mistakes have happened and how we're going to fix them. And we're going to create that sort of open conversation that involves everybody. And through that, we can create psychological safety. And if you're interested in learning more about psychological safety, this book by Amy Edmondson is a great place to start. Another step on the road to development is around the importance of ownership. And I think ownership is critical to development. And I would encourage you to find some small thing that every employee can own around your lab, some process, some test, some method, some safety responsibility, something that they can own, where they can feel the emotional attachment to both the challenges and the successes. The more they feel that emotional attachment, the more they're going to do the things that owners do. And that's going to create higher level decision making. Now, part of creating ownership opportunities gives you the opportunity to delegate, but learning how to delegate is another talk. But I think it's an opportunity to make parallel processes where you provide development and you learn delegation. Another aspect of developing staff is around training, and there's a lot of benefits for training. I like the drive for excellence. It's one of my core values. It really enables retention. There's plenty of data that says that employees value training and development, and they're going to stay to the places that give it to them. It clearly builds knowledge and skills that are useful for the lab. And from a development perspective, it enables more opportunity. It also helps with employee engagement. So there's a lot of good reasons to do training. We can also find some remote training opportunities. Oops, went through that slide too fast. I sometimes get confused by the delay, but here we go. We're in the right place now. There's a lot of remote training available today, and there's a lot more now today than there was 6 months ago, because the people who provide training and provide teaching have had to adapt to this new environment as well. So there's webinars like this one, and there's a wealth of them. There's all kinds of online courses. There's a lot of things you can do. And you can also do remote training internally, right? So you can pair up staff, perhaps one who's in the lab and one who's at home, or however your staff is spaced based on this social distancing. But you can have group interactions, you can assign reading, you can do book clubs, you can even ask people to create content as part of their training exercise. So we've all done training, we've all been involved with training in the past. Here's some training tips from us. First of all, let's focus on using our training dollars and time to grow strengths. It's frankly a waste of time and money to try to grow weaknesses. It just doesn't work. I'll encourage you as a lab manager to ensure that you have a thoughtful plan for your training and that you're including it in your objectives. If you're doing internal training, both for the student and for the teacher, it'll demonstrate to them that this training is important to you and you're going to include it in their priorities for the year. I think there's lots of opportunities today for remote training, and encourage people to go out and look for them. There's all sorts of new stuff happening all the time. And those changes around us have helped create some of those new opportunities. Here at LabManager, we're also recognizing this need. And so one of the projects I'm working on is developing a LabManager certificate. And this would be driven by taking online courses, much like this webinar, where we're going to provide the basic training that's needed to be a lab manager. For most of us, we were good scientists. We had lots of scientific training, and then through a variety of circumstances became lab managers. But for a lot of things on the right-hand side of this slide, we've had to learn them the hard way. And so we're going to build training courses that deal with a lot of these different kinds of things that lab managers need to know. And if you're interested in learning more about the lab management certificate, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you about it. In the end, we all need help. A lab manager role is really difficult. There's a lot of different things that is required of us, and we have a lot of different responsibilities. So especially when you're thinking about staff development, how can we get some help? Let's encourage staff to help each other. So we have a whole bunch of different people who can teach on staff and other people who can learn. And it's not always the long-term experience stuff who are always the teachers, right? We may have young people who come in who are more social media savvy or more tech savvy, who can teach some of us old timers how to do some of this remote learning more easily. It's really beneficial to you to develop a asking for help culture. And so making asking for help not only safe to do, but expected to do will help you with all of this. You can coordinate mentors, you can create teaching pairs. You can also share some of these development activities with other parts of your organization. Find the people who know what needs to be taught and offer to teach others. And there's always ways to hire people. And so here's the summary of what we've talked about today. Leadership has lots of challenges, and lab management has a wide range of challenges. Doing it remotely has increased the challenge. And so it requires us as lab managers to develop our own skills and to make sure that we are learning what we need to learn in order to help our staff. A lot of those challenges are around communication. And so we need to address our own challenges around communication first, and then help the people in the lab to improve remote communication. We know that we can do development. We've all done it before, but I'm here to convince you that you can do it remotely. And just because we are working from home doesn't mean that processes like employee career development are postponed. We can work through this difficulty just like we're doing other things. And we have to provide both opportunity and protection for people to develop, which means creating a coverage system or a support system that's going to learn from mistakes rather than punish people for mistakes. And in this new world we're living in, there's all sorts of remote training options that are available, and we need to take advantage of them. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. I hope you're looking for the future webinars that are part of the ALMA virtual conference. I really have my fingers crossed that we've come through the other side of this pandemic and we can have an in-person ALMA conference next fall. I've missed it this year and I'm really looking forward to it. On the right side of this slide in the ALMA logo, you'll see the online networking. That's the Give and Take ring where you can ask and offer help. And so I will encourage you to look into that. There are other places where you can get help. I talked about the Center for Positive Organizations. I really like the CPO. There's a lot of things that they do that can be beneficial. Here at LabManager, I'd encourage you to look at our website. Look at our magazine. So we're going to offer articles both online and in print that will provide information like this to you, so there's other sources to learn. And at LabManager, we also do our summits. And so there's more ways that you can learn from experienced lab leaders. Some of these are online. Hopefully next year they'll be in person, but I'm looking forward to being there with you. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. I would be very happy to answer any questions.
Scott, thank you for that wonderful presentation on new challenges of lab management. So we have time for 2 to 3 questions. So I wanted to ask a question, Scott, one of the first ones I got. So you talked about the recommendation to use video makes sense, when we're having these Zoom calls or Teams calls. So, but how do you balance the fact that when working from home, employees may be more casual in their appearance, which can be a disadvantage to women and minorities in certain corporate cultures? What would you say about that? How to address that?
So that's a great question, and I certainly recognize where that question is coming from. But I think the issue in hand here isn't whether people are going to dress informally from home. It's more the system that they're pointing out about how it impacts some women and some minorities. I think as lab managers, we have to take responsibility for the culture in our labs. And we need to make it okay for people to be the best person they can be. And working from home has all of its challenges. Why do I have to put a white shirt and a tie on to work from home? People need to, I think, be respectful. And there are certainly states of clothing that we would not consider to be respectful. But let's set the bar at respectful instead of some biased view of professionalism that comes out of 1950s white America. I think we can lead our labs into a better place than that.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Scott. So one other question that was asked was, so, you talked about, development and how do you monitor employee development remotely? And that's really a hard thing to do. And could you kind of expand on that?
That is a great question, and it's something that we all have to do. So I think the key to it is shifting away from an activity approach to development and shifting to an outcome or achievement path to development. And this is really around writing SMART goals for people's development so that there is a very clear understanding of what is needed. It's specific, it's measurable, right? All the other bits of a SMART goal. And then talking about how they are being accomplished. And you can have conversation leading up to it, trying to understand where the progress is. Are things being accomplished? But once they're accomplished, we can have that conversation clearly, remotely. And if we can get away from the activity-based approach to development, then we don't need to see their activity every day. We just need to understand how they have achieved and accomplished the goals.
Great. Yeah, I think we have time for one more question. So, what are some options, for internal training when lab occupancy is limited?
So there's a lot of different ways we can do this kind of training internally. The simplest one is if you're the one who's in the lab and the other person's at home, grab your laptop, drag it into the lab with you, point the camera at the instrument at your hands. You can show somebody how to do something just as effectively this way as if they're standing next to you, right? We have the tools. If your lab hasn't invested in a simple $50 webcam, maybe now is the time, right? So you can talk through things, you can share experiences, you can share problem solving, you can do the things you would do shoulder to shoulder in the lab or sitting across from each other in a conference room just as effectively remotely. Just turn the cameras on and ask questions. But I think we have the technology to solve these problems. We just have to have confidence in the technology.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott. So I'm getting some questions about, would love to get information on the certificate. And I was wondering, could I potentially send your email into the chat? Would that be
yes.
Okay? I know it was on the last slide, but yeah, I'm getting some comments about more information on the certificate.
That's awesome. I'm very happy to hear that. Yes, Thad, please put my email address, the shanton@labmanager.com, into the chat. I would be very happy to hear from anybody on this webinar, and really anybody in our whole ALMA community about the Lab Manager certificate. We're still in the development stages, so we're very much open to input about, what do you need to see in it and how would it work for you? And so, yes, this is a project that's near and dear to me, and I would be very happy for input.
All right. Well, thanks, Scott. So this brings us to the end of our third webinar in the 2020 ALMA webinar series. We would like to remind you that this webinar will be available on the ALMA website. On behalf of ALMA, we would like to thank Scott Hanton for presenting today. We would also like to thank the audience for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Thanks again to GLTech and Labtopia for sponsoring this webinar. For more information on our upcoming webinars, please visit the ALMA website. We look forward to you joining our next webinar on October 21st, when Mary Swans will present on meeting the challenges of a multi-generational workforce. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.